is the idea of what is called Yuan. This is romanized Jen, but it's this character in Chinese. And it means human-heartedness. To be a reasonable person is the highest of all virtues. And that really, it means, it involves, for example, the ability to come off it, to avoid fanaticism, to accept the fact that all human beings are good, bad, that we all have in ourselves an element of the rascal, and that you should simply get along by recognizing that, so that if somebody picks a fight with you, you work out a compromise. You realize that he picked the fight simply because he had emotions, and he was human, he was greedy, or whatever it is, and so are you. And so you work out a compromise. And the Confucian would say that the human being as he is, both bad and good, is more trustworthy and reliable than a person who pretends that he's not like that. A person who pretends that he is good and moral and in all things the model of integrity is a very dangerous man. Confucius said the goody-goodies are the thieves of virtue. So Yuan is the Confucian norm. But then they like to live a very artificial style of life, with a great deal of formality and good manners and propriety. And Confucians are rather much Puritans when it comes to sex. On the other hand, the Taoists represent the opposite pole. They make fun of all attempts to pin things down in words, because they say, with what words will you define the right words? And with what words will you define those? They know that a dictionary is circular. Have you ever played a game called Vish, short for vicious circle? What you do is this. You have a number of people sitting around a table, each one with a standard college dictionary. And there's a referee. And at the word go, a certain word is given. And everybody looks up that word. Then they look up the key word and the definition of that word. And then they look up the key word and the definition of that word, and so on. When they get round to the start word again, they call out Vish. The person who calls out Vish first is the winner of the game. But the referee is to decide whether you played fair, whether you really looked up a significant word in each clause. And you have to have a pad to keep a record of your steps, the words you looked up. So that if anyone challenges you, the referee can judge. So Taoism is the force in Chinese culture which represents disillusion with the social game. You see, Lao Tzu himself, by legend, who is supposed to have lived around 600 BC, be a contemporary of Confucius, but probably lived rather later than that. He was supposed to be the court librarian, and who became absolutely sick of the intrigue and the flattery and the insincerity of court life, and decided to quit, just go off by himself on a hike in the mountains. But he was stopped at the gate by the captain of the guard, who said, "Sir, we can't let you go unless you first leave behind a compendium of your wisdom." So he's supposed to have sat down in the gatehouse and written the stanzas of the Tao Te Ching, translated over 70 times into English alone. And then the guard let him go, and he disappeared into the mountains. So the idea of, to put it very boldly, the idea of Confucianism is that all details of living should be done in a state of highly controlled consciousness and should be just so exactly right according to the rules. The counter idea of Taoism is that it's better to let everything happen by itself. Trust your impulses, trust your instincts, trust your natural urges. Let go of it all. Now, these two ways of describing Confucianism and Taoism are exaggerated. I am caricaturing them for the sake of contrast. For example, a Taoist is not really a person who believes in pure laissez-faire. What he's trying to say, the principle in Taoism called Wu Wei, which means non-interference, or non-aggression, non-assertion. He's saying, don't act against the grain of things, act with it. Wu Wei is applied in judo. Now, judo is, as you know, a highly effective form of interfering with things, but it does it on the principle of going with the grain. In other words, if in judo, there is a form of judo which is called juno kata, and it's slow motion judo to demonstrate the principles. And in one of these juno kata exercises, there is always the attacker and the defender. And the attacker begins by going at you like this. See? And this is the lead. Now, what does the defender do? Instead of hitting back at that lead, he does this. He takes the hand of the attacker and pulls it on like this. Then he catches the other hand and bends the fellow across the court. In another one, the attacker does this. Going to the jaw. The defender catches this upswinging hand like this, carries it right on, twirls the fellow round, locks his arm thus. The attacker is now bending backwards like this, but he's facing this way, and his right arm is thus caught. See, these are the formal exercises which demonstrate the principles. The principle of judo is overcoming nature by cooperating. Same way as a sailor tacks against the wind. So you see, it isn't quite not doing anything. It's, as we say, striking while the iron is hot, taking time by the forelock, etc., etc. There is a tide in the affairs of men which, taken at its flood, leads on to fortune. And that's Taoism. But Taoism does tend to be the attitude of skepticism towards the social and commercial rat race, and says, really, do we have to play that game? Wouldn't you actually be better off living in a kind of dignified poverty? And so you see, in a way, Taoism is a philosophy for old people. After you've sowed your wild oats and you've made something in life and had children and so on, and you become an old gentleman, well, that's enough of that. And so you ask the question, now, behind this facade I put on, this role I've been playing and pretending that I'm someone, who am I really? And what is all this thing about? So the Taoist is a kind of a mountain man. He goes to the mountains. And you know that lovely Chinese poem? It's called Seeking the Hermit. I asked the boy beneath the pines, and he says the master's gone alone, herb gathering somewhere on the mountain, cloud hidden, whereabouts unknown. And so there's this notion, you know, of the old man, mysterious old man, somewhere up there on Mount Tamalpais, and those trails hidden by the mist. And the Taoists really dig that. And that's landscape paintings of the Chinese, of the old masters, sitting on craggy canyons, drinking sake or whatever, plum wine or whatever they have. That's their idea of good life. Now, both the Confucians and the Taoists although there's a certain puritanism in Confucian ethics, they all believe in the physical world as a good thing. The Taoist loves nature, the Confucian is particular about parents, family, all that jazz. The Buddhists of India, on the other hand, tended very often to be anti-physical. I mean, in other words, to be celibate, to be interested in getting out of this state of consciousness in which the world appears to us in its multiplicity. The Chinese never could get on with that. They didn't see any sense in Indian attitude. So when Buddhism came to China, the Chinese did a flip with it. And they wanted a kind of Buddhism which, although it was sort of monastic in the Indian tradition, was not monastic in the way that it is in India or in Burma, Ceylon. Buddhism for the Chinese is to some extent a thing which you go into for a time and you attain enlightenment. Then you can come back, as it were, and do anything you want. You can have family, you can be a tramp, you can just play it any way. But they feel into the whole tone of the Mahayana type of Buddhism, even in India, is that once enlightened, you ought to come back. So the situation of a Buddhist monk in the Far East is, generally speaking, that he's not quite like a monk as we understand monks in the West. Monks in the West take life vows. They vow poverty, chastity, and obedience until they die. But in the Far East, a Buddhist monk may go into the discipline for a number of years and then return to lay life with no bad feelings. In fact, he may be considered a considerable success in having done so. So, that kind of trend in the Confucian and the Taoist attitudes, when it coalesces with Indian Buddhism, produces something very different from anything you'll find in India. And Zen uniquely and outstandingly represents this sort of attitude. So, too, when these Indian monks worked with their Chinese opposites, the scholars, to translate the Buddhist Sanskrit texts into Chinese, it was obvious that they would find equivalent words from the vocabulary of Taoism. So, for example, when any Chinese master is addressing his students, the phrase which he's liable to use in saying students, he says Dao Yu. Dao Yu means, we translate it, O you followers of the way, of the Tao, the way of nature. But the Buddhist marga, the path, the Noble Eightfold Path, the road, the path, finds the Chinese equivalent in Dao. But Dao means far more than Marga. Dao has overtones which the word Marga doesn't have in Sanskrit. Marga is simply something like a method, a course of discipline, a set of stages. But Dao means the fundamental way of the world, what is innate, so that if you can find out what is innate in you to do or to be, and follow that, you're following the Tao. You're not following any laid down set of rules. But Marga in Sanskrit means a set of rules. Do you see what happens? Now furthermore, say Dao is to say the character Liu, which is follower, actually means flow. So you get Feng Liu, which means the flow of the wind, and thus has come to mean elegance of a certain kind. See, supposing somebody is sitting by the stream, like here, on a misty evening, and the bird is calling in the distance, and he's sitting there fishing. But he's not fishing just to catch fish. He's not just a peasant who needs fish. He's a poet who doesn't care whether he catches a fish or not. He just loves to be there and dig that scene. That's Feng Liu. It's a word that means everything. The Feng, which means ordinarily wind, also means atmosphere in the sense that you say a place or a room has a certain atmosphere. That restaurant has atmosphere. Feng. There's also feng shui, the Chinese word. Japanese would say fushu. The atmosphere of our school. In other words, the Zen school has a certain flavor to it, which you recognize in the way a man walks, or his style. So its enlightenment experience, its satori, has a certain style to it that is different from other people's enlightenment, although they're all equally enlightened. So Liu, the Feng Liu, is the flow. So when you translate from Sanskrit, follower of the path, and you come out with Daolyu, Japanese say Doryu, you get an entirely different meaning. Somebody who flows with the Tao. So a Zen monk is called in Chinese Yun Sui, cloud water man. Yun, cloud, Sui, water. Because he drifts like a cloud, he has no attachment, you see, and he flows like water. He may be called in Sanskrit one who has entered the stream. That's the technical meaning for somebody who's started on the way of Buddhism. He has entered the stream. But this doesn't have the same quality of meaning as Yun Sui. He has entered the stream in the sense that he is crossing the stream from this shore to the other shore. But Yun Sui means he's going with the stream. If you've read that marvelous book of Hermann Hesse called Siddhartha, where he ends up with the enlightenment of his hero by watching a river and learning from the river, you know exactly what the Taoist means by flowing with the Tao. Because he sees, of course, the river is simultaneously at its source and at its goal, and that all the forms in it are forms of the whole river, and at the same time, there's nothing individual about them. Well, I mean, each form is individual, but at the same time, it isn't a lump of water. You know, a wave isn't a lump of water. It's water passing constantly, flowing through the wave. The wave stays there, but the water flows through. See? So that's what he learned from the stream. So you see how the Chinese language, when you turn Sanskrit words into it, the Chinese language with the background of meaning that these words have acquired from Taoist philosophy, made a complete change in the nature of Buddhism. Also, there's another thing to it. The Chinese called a bluff on a lot of Indian nonsense. I have to explain this by telling a sort of a modern anecdote. Joseph Campbell, who is, as you know, the editor of all the works of Heinrich Zimmer, and actually wrote them himself out of Zimmer's notes, went to India, and he went to the greatest living guru in India today, who is an ex-policeman, and said to him, the sutras say that all things are Brahman. Isn't this also true of the illusion of the Maya? Isn't that the way, you know, we feel every day, and just ordinary kind of human beings? Isn't that the Brahman too? And this man said, you know, it's interesting. That was the first question I asked my teacher. He said, of course they are. Well, Joe said, nobody in India teaches that anymore. So the guru took Joseph downstairs to all his students and said, I want you to meet a great rishi, sage from America. He really has found it, and you should, he will now give you a lecture or something. I don't know what happened. In other words, the Hindu tends to say, yes, in fact, all this world that you see now before your eyes is the divine, ultimate, non-dual reality. But of course, you have to find out that it is. And when you do, it will disappear. You will go into what they call nirvikalpa samadhi. That means, technically, it means being in a state of samadhi without having concepts. But they mean something else by it. They mean as if all the shapes that you saw before you were suddenly to dim out. And instead, there is nothing but light. See? Maybe this is light is slightly violet, but I don't know. Anyway, that every kind of sensual experience disappears. Now then, the way in which you have to argue this with a Hindu Swami, take this line, is to say, but your position is still dualistic, because you've moved from the vision of form to the formless vision. This is just changing places. This is not liberation. It's somewhere else on the wheel. And you know they have to admit it. And I once had an argument with the Swami in which I brought up a point we were discussing this morning. He was referring to the Brahman, the ultimate reality, as the one, as oneness, as distinct from multiplicity. I said, oneness has an opposite, and the Brahman has no opposite. What do you think he said? He said, you argue just like a Hindu. Well, he knew very well. I mean, he was using loose language, and as we all do. So this was the thing, you see, historically, in the development of Indian philosophy that took place between about 100 and 400 AD, that they faced the fact that looking for a state of consciousness that's radically different from this state now is just an escape. It hasn't really come to terms with the problem. The problem is, you see, that the state of consciousness you're in now, however loused up it may be, is in Hindu language the play of Vishnu. You are all Vishnu playing that you're in this mess, which is the part of the cosmic dance. So, if that's the case, dig it, you see? I mean, get with it. Be that. So the Chinese caught on to this. And when you could say, this very moment, this very world, this very body is the point now. But if you see you're seeking something beyond all the time, you never get with it. You're never here. So they saw that very clearly. So this man, Sun Tzu, who I was talking about at the end of this morning's session, who is one of the first, I would say, really articulate people about Zen, who wrote the Shin Shin Ming, he starts out by saying, the great Tao, or the perfect Tao, is without difficulty, except that it avoids picking and choosing. Only when you neither love nor hate does it appear in all clarity. A hair's breadth of deviation from it, and a deep gulf is set between heaven and earth. If you want to get hold of what it looks like, do not be anti or pro anything. The conflict of longing and loathing, this is the disease of the mind. Okay, now, if you take that quite literally, if you try to avoid picking and choosing, that's another kind of choice, isn't it? If you say, I ought not to love anything, I ought not to hate anything, I ought not to take any extreme attitudes, you're still choosing. If I say in psychological jargon, for psychiatric help, you ought to accept yourself. No? Accept everything that happens. Well, among the things that happen is the very concrete fact that there are things you don't accept and that you can't accept. So you have to accept that. Now, do you see what this does? It's a very interesting technique. It's saying that you are, each one, a Buddha, enlightened, even before you've accepted yourself. You see, you don't have to do anything about it. But it's terribly difficult for human beings to resist the temptation to do something about it. So it says, okay, do that. If you want to practice yoga and meditation, go ahead. If you feel that would make you better, do it. But the point is that there's really nothing to do, or there's nothing not to do either. You won't get this by sort of acting spontaneous in a phony way, but you can do that if you want to do. But you're it right where you stand without making a single move. And that's what's meant, you see, profoundly by avoiding picking and choosing. Actually, there's nothing you can do about it. You may get the illusion that your picking and choosing makes a real difference, that your choices really do change the nature of things, but they don't. And so, so long as you want to hang on to that illusion, play it, there you are. But actually, you are, as you live and all sit around this room at the moment, in the various stages of what you may consider subjectively to be goodness and badness, sickness and health, sanity and insanity. Every one of you is as much a splendid accomplishment as the shape of the clouds, and just as natural. You know, with all the funny hairdos and artificiality and everything. We're all like the birds. Only we have a complicated way of pretending that we aren't, so that we figure out we're something special. And that's it too, you see. But it is a tough job getting anybody to see that. So what do? They have all these techniques, and they put you through the mill, because people won't accept this vision until they feel they've paid for it.